If you've ever felt like life's chaos can only be survived with a dose of sharp humor and a knack for turning the everyday absurd into a laugh out loud anecdote, then today's book just might be for you. Today, I'll be reviewing Happy Go Lucky by David Sedaris. Welcome to Spencer Reads Everything. I'm your host, Spencer Duncan, and today we're diving into Sedaris' latest essay collection. This book, Happy Go Lucky, is quintessential David Sedaris. It's funny, it's biting, and it's surprisingly tender. For anyone unfamiliar with David Sedaris, he is a master of the personal essay, blending observations of the mundane with his unique perspective to craft stories that are both relatable and hilariously offbeat. And this collection, which was published in 2022, continues in that vein. But I will say it also carries a slightly darker undertone, and it reflects in many ways stuff that the world was going through. For example, the pandemic era and Sedaris' musings on aging and loss and the world's general state of disarray. Happy Go Lucky is a mix of hilarious family stories as well as bizarre encounters and poignant reflections on mortality, and it's divided into essays so that you can read it in bits and pieces or devour it in one sitting. Though if you're like me, you might find yourself laughing so much you'll finish it faster than expected. So what is Happy Go Lucky? Well, there's no overarching narrative, but several essays do stand out. Sedaris is writing about his late father in particular, Lou Sedaris, who passed away at the age of 98 just a couple years ago. These essays offer a raw and complex look at their relationship. Lou was, by all accounts, a difficult man, and Sedaris doesn't sugarcoat the challenges of loving someone who was often distant and critical, especially ever since David Sedaris came out as gay. He and his father have had a strained relationship, I believe, clear up until his father's passing. But despite this, there is a tenderness in these reflections that feels new for Sedaris in some ways. It's a reminder that even flawed relationships can hold meaning. And of course, there's also plenty of humor. Sedaris recounts odd interactions with fans during his book tours. Those are quite entertaining in my opinion. His adventures in picking up trash along the roadside, something that he has actually been well known for some time, and has done it, I believe, famously where he lived in England and also in France, and maybe he did it in Japan, I'm not sure, but this is something that he likes to do pretty much everywhere that he lives. And he even has a little anecdote where he talks about his experiences with Botox. So certainly have a mix of the absurd, even simple things that he may have a particular opinion of. He's still just going to present it in this exaggerated way. His commentary on masks during the pandemic is a great example of that. But you also have the reflective, such as how he processes his sister Tiffany's death, which happened some time ago, and it's something that has been in a lot of his collection of essays because it's something that still weighs very heavily on him, and it certainly casts a shadow over his family dynamics. What really stood out to me about Happy Go Lucky is Sedaris' ability to balance humor and heartbreak, which is not something that he always has to do. Humor is always there. The combination of humor and heartbreak, I would say that that is a new dynamic in this one, and it is at a whole new level. And I think he is much more candid about his long-term relationships, not just with his father and his other family members, which have always been parts of his stories, but in this case, he also has a much more frank discussion about his relationship with his longtime partner, Hugh. And I think all of that makes this just a little different in many respects to his other books, even though in many ways it is also very much the same and things that you've always come to expect. You'll be reading about something utterly ridiculous, like Sedaris' weird habit of shopping at Costco with no intention of buying anything, and then seemingly out of nowhere, you're hit with this profound insight about life or family or mortality. And that's just what you can expect out of this one that you can't necessarily find in all of his other works. For example, one of my favorite essays is about Sedaris' father, and it's equal parts funny, but also devastating. There's a moment where Sedaris reflects on how his father's declining health softened him in ways Sedaris never expected. And then there's a scene of Sedaris having his father's ashes divided up in a parking lot, which is just absurd. And it could really only come from someone like David Sedaris. Also, Sedaris' wit hasn't dulled one bit. I would say that that is on full display here, and his commentary on the absurdity of modern life is as sharp as ever. Whether he's talking about his love of buying replacement items or the bizarre encounters he's had during book signings, something that I've already said is one of the funnier elements of this book. His humor is, as usual, disarming and quite relatable for someone who is so eccentric. I find that incredibly valuable and something that makes this book worth picking up for most people. So who is Happy-Go-Lucky for? Well, obviously, if you're a fan of Sedaris, this book is a must-read. It's also great for anyone who loves a mix of humor and heart. If you enjoy memoirs that aren't afraid to be a little messy, or books that find humor in the absurd, then I think you will enjoy this one. I think this is, like I said, it's a little darker than some of Sedaris's books, but by and large, I still think it is a very good representation of his books. He's had quite a few projects over the years, and they've taken on various types of telling stories, although almost always in this little vignette style. And I would say that this might be, for those that haven't read anything else by Sedaris, I certainly think you could enjoy it. But if you have read anything else by Sedaris, just be prepared to still have that humor, that criticism, but also just a little extra in there, which I think is an important part of this book. And I think that contributes to the title of Happy-Go-Lucky in a way that I don't think I've always seen reflected in his works. If you're new to Sedaris, this might not be the best place to start. I'd probably recommend starting with something like Me Talk Pretty One Day, or Calypso, a book that came out just a couple years before this, that I'd say is very similar in structure, minus that added depth of darkness and elements of relationship that I think, again, I found them to be very impactful. But if you're not familiar with David Sedaris, then maybe you should start with something like that. I would say that those books are probably a little more accessible and equally as funny. Who is this book not for? Well, if you're looking for a traditional narrative with the beginning, the middle, and an end, that's not here. This is, as usual, a collection of essays, and I would say that his essays are more like snapshots than a continuous story. Also, if you're uncomfortable with the dark humor or the frank discussions about death or grief or family dysfunction, which I would say the family dysfunction in this case is far less humorous than it has been in his other books, and it is much more acknowledging the things that have made him and his family the way that they are, which is not always something that he is proud of. And so you might find some parts of this collection just a little more difficult to read. But all in all, I'd still say this is generally a good read, and I would recommend this to pretty much anyone that likes humor, anyone that likes to be entertained, but they can also engage with the slightly darker, the more dysfunctional, and the more reflective elements of this that I do think are also very poignant and have a lot to say about our life experiences. I would love to know what you guys have to say about this book in particular, or just any book by David Sedaris. I'm always up for a discussion about David Sedaris. I think he is so funny, so witty, but I also think that he has his issues that can make him a somewhat problematic figure to really discuss or engage with, and he certainly has that element of absurdity that might not appeal to everyone. But please let me know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, turn on the notifications, and until next time, thank you for watching. I greatly appreciate all of your support. As a reminder, I've just recently launched another channel, History Unraveled with Dr. Duncan. You can find a link to it in the description. Please go check that out if that sounds remotely interesting to you. Also, I have recently launched a Patreon for this channel. Please check that out. I greatly appreciate any way that anybody can help support this channel so that I can bring you more videos and more reviews so we can keep talking about books. And as always, until next time, keep those pages turning.